The first sound was the crunch of gravel at 6:42 a.m. It was a sound that didn't belong. My mornings on the ranch were a carefully curated symphony of silence, punctuated only by the whistle of a brewing kettle and the distant call of a hawk circling the upper meadow. This sound was different. It was the sound of purpose, of intention, and it was happening on my side of the fence. I stood at the kitchen window, my favorite Muga, heavy ceramic thing Eleanor had made in a pottery class years ago, warming my hands. Through the steam rising from the black coffee, I saw them. A white pickup truck with the words, Mountain View Estates, HOA, emblazoned on the door was parked. Tires chewing into the soft shoulder of my private access road. And there, directing two men who were wrestling a large wooden sign out of the truck bed, was Carol. Carol Jenkins, president of the Homeowners Association, self-appointed guardian of community aesthetics, and a woman who moved with the unshakable certainty of someone who has never been told a no in a meaningful way. She was pointing a manicured finger at a spot of earth not 20 feet from my porch, a spot that was unequivocally mine. The sign they were preparing to install was a monstrosity of routed pine and forest green paint. It read, Mountain View Community Trail, dawn to dusk, respect the land. It was a beautiful sentiment, attached to an act of brazen theft. I watched as one of the men started to unwind a post-hole digger. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It was still too hot, and it burned my tongue. The small, sharp pain was a clarifying sensation. I set the mug down on the granite countertop, picked up my phone, and began to record. I didn't storm out. I didn't shout from the porch. My father, a man who built bridges his entire life, both literal and metaphorical, taught me that the person who loses their temper has already lost the argument. Instead, I waited. I let the video on my phone run, capturing the men digging, capturing Carol supervising with her arms crossed, a vision of suburban manifest destiny. The timestamp on the video was a silent, impartial witness. Only when the first post was dropped into the freshly dug hole did I open my door and walk outside. The cool morning air felt good. I was wearing slippers, an old flannel robe, and the same pair of jeans I had been wearing for 3 days. I was not an intimidating presence, and that was precisely the point. "Good morning, Carol," I said. My voice was even quiet. It carried easily in the still air. She turned, a bright, artificial smile plastered on her face. It was the same smile she used at the annual HOA barbecue, just before announcing a new, universally despised regulation. "Arthur, good morning. So glad you're up? We didn't want to wake you, but we're just so excited to get the new trail access officially opened for the community." I glanced at the hole in my land, at the sign leaning against her truck. "This is my property, Carol." Her smile didn't falter, but it tightened at the edges. It was a fascinating thing to watch, the micro-expressions of a tyrant encountering unexpected friction. "Well, yes, technically," she conceded, as if the concept of a deed was a charming but outdated formality. "But it's been used as an access path for years, long before you even moved in. The board has voted to formalize it for the good of the community. We're calling it the Sunrise Trail." I kept my gaze level. I didn't look at the workmen, who were now standing awkwardly, pretending to be fascinated by the contents of the hole they just dug. I looked only at her. "There is no recorded easement on my title," I said. "Not for a trail. Not for historic use. Not for anything. This is when the performance truly began." Her posture shifted. The folksy community organizer persona dissolved, replaced by the steely administrator. "Arthur, I don't want to get into a whole legal thing with you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "The HOA has a right to secure access. Our lawyers have confirmed it. This path connects the lower development to the National Forest access point. It's vital. Now we are trying to do this the nice way. We're even putting up this beautiful, professionally made sign at the association's expense. I let the silence hang for a moment. I could feel my phone still recording in my robe pocket, a silent digital memory. You are trespassing, I said. You and your workers. You are damaging my property. I am asking you, politely, to stop, fill in that hole, and leave. The mask of civility fell away completely. Her face flushed a dull, angry red. I am the president of this HOA, she snapped, as if the title conferred sovereignty. And you are a member. If you obstruct this community project, I will have you fined. I will put a lien on your house so fast your head will spin. I will call the sheriff right now and have you cited for harassment. Do you understand me? This trail is happening? I didn't answer. I just looked at her. I looked at the sign, at the hole, at the men who suddenly found the distant mountains incredibly interesting. I let her threat settle into the recording in my pocket. I had her on video admitting her identity, stating her purpose, issuing direct threats, and asserting a legal claim based on nothing but her own will. It was more than enough. After a few more seconds of my silence, she huffed in exasperation, turned on her heel, and barked at the men, "Get the concrete. Let's get this thing set before he has a full-blown tantrum." I turned and walked back into my house. I didn't slam the door, I closed it softly. I walked back to the window, picked up my cooling coffee, and continued to watch. They mixed the concrete in a wheelbarrow, they set the posts, they bolted the ridiculous sign to them. All on my land, all on video, she had no idea. She had no idea who she was dealing with, what she had just started. She thought she was in a neighborhood dispute. She had no idea she had just declared war on the man who wrote the rules she thought she was using. But before I tell you what I did next, I should probably explain. This wasn't about a 20-square-foot patch of grass or a poorly designed sign. It was about order. It was about the quiet, invisible lines that allow us to live together without tearing each other apart. My entire life, my entire career, had been dedicated to drawing those lines, defining them, and making them clear, fair, and permanent. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 72 years old. For 45 years, I was a land use attorney. For the last 20 of those years, I served as the chief planning consultant for this very county. When the Board of Supervisors decided to completely overhaul the county's antiquated zoning and development codes in the late 1992s, I was the one they hired to lead the project. I spent 3 years in dusty courthouse basements, in libraries, in public hearings, and at my drafting table, writing the very comprehensive plan and the Unified Development Ordinance that now governed every square inch of land in this county, including the patch of dirt Carol Jenkins was currently claiming by right of eminent domain of the perpetually aggrieved. I knew the code not just because I had read it. I knew it because I had written it. I knew the history behind every setback requirement, the legal precedents that informed every definition of easement, and the precise legislative intent of every single comma. My wife, Eleanor, used to joke that I was married to the county code. She'd find me at the kitchen table late at night, surrounded by plat maps and legal pads, and she'd say, "Are you communing with the great spirit of Section 4? Paragraph B again, dear?" She was the artist, the free spirit. I was the architect, the man who believed that a well-written contract, a clearly defined property line, was a form of poetry. It was a system of trust, written down and made real. When she passed away 4 years ago, the silence in our suburban house was deafening. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the mountains. It was the hollow silence of absence. So I sold the house and bought this casa, 200 acres of meadows and ponderosa pine, backing up against the national forest. It was the last large, undeveloped parcel adjacent to the Mountain View estates. I bought it for the quiet. I bought it for the solitude. I bought it because I wanted my property lines to be miles away, not feet. I had, it seemed, failed. Carol Jenkins had moved in about 2 years after I did. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of boundless energy and unexamined confidence. She and her husband had come from some hyper-competitive coastal city, and she brought that same manic energy to our quiet mountain community. She saw traditions as inefficiencies and quiet neighbors as an untapped resource pool. Within a year, she had leveraged a combination of charm, guilt, and sheer persistence to get herself elected president of the HOA. And then her work truly began. The first volley of notices went out. A month after her election. Violations for unapproved mailbox colors, for seasonal decorations left up 2 days past the arbitrary deadline, for visible trash cans on non-collection days. She had a particular obsession with lawn maintenance. Old Mr. Henderson, a widower in his 80s, who lived on a small pension, was fined nearly $1,000 over a period of 6 months because dandelions kept appearing in his yard. She was a master of the petty tyranny, using the HOA's covenant as her personal scepter to enforce her specific, narrow vision of a perfect community. The trail issue had started subtly. The previous owner of my ranch, a gruff but decent old rancher named Dale, had a handshake agreement with a few of his immediate neighbors. End quote. They could walk their dogs along the edge of his pasture, as long as they cleaned up after them and kept the gate closed. It was a kindness, a neighborly accommodation. But in Carol's mind, that informal permission granted to a few had metastasized into an immutable public right for all 300 homes in the development. She began referring to it in HOA newsletters as the community right-of-way. She started organizing group hikes, publishing maps with a dotted line drawn straight across my land. I saw it coming. The slow, creeping erosion of a boundary, both literally and figuratively. I knew that one day her ambition would lead her to my front door, so I started preparing. I didn't confront her, I didn't send angry emails, I began to build a file. When she sent me my first violation, Notice A for the color of my barn, which she deemed not in harmony with the natural mountain palette, I didn't argue. I just paid the $50 fine with a personal check. I kept the canceled check. I kept the violation notice. I photographed the barn, along with a paint swatch from the county's own list of pre-approved historic rural structure colors. I put it all in a simple manila folder. On the tab, I wrote in black marker, the Carol file. Over the next year, the file grew thicker. I paid a fine for unmanaged native grasses in my meadow. I paid a fine for a non-conforming agricultural fence that had been there since the 1952. Every notice, every check, every piece of correspondence went into the file. I was not just collecting evidence of her harassment against me. I was establishing a clear, documented pattern of behavior. I was creating a paper trail of her overreach, her misinterpretation of the rules, and my quiet, consistent compliance. On paper, I was the model resident, and she was the overzealous administrator. She thought my silence was weakness. She mistook my patience for surrender. She had no idea that I was simply giving her the rope piece by piece, document by document. And that morning, as she cemented a sign into my land, she had finally decided to use it. After they finished, after Carol took a few self-satisfied pictures of her new sign with her phone and drove away, I went back to my desk. The anger was there, a low, cold burn in my stomach, but I channeled it. This was no longer a matter of emotion. It was a matter of process. This was work. I pulled out the Carroll file, now nearly 3 inches thick, and placed it on the right side of my desk. On the left, I placed a fresh legal pad and my favorite fountain pen. In the center, I opened my laptop. It was time to stop being a passive archivist and start being a lawyer again. First, I drafted a formal letter. It was polite, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was addressed to Carol Jenkins and the entire HOA Board of Directors. It began, "This letter serves as formal notice that on Tuesday, the 5th of October, at approximately 6:45 a.m., agents of the Mountain View Estates, HOA, under your direct supervision, did knowingly and willfully trespass upon my property, legally described as Parcel 73-4A, and did cause material damage by excavating and installing a permanent structure." I cited the relevant state statutes for trespassing and property damage. I included the time-stamped video file as an attachment in the email version. I then systematically dismantled her claim of a historic use easement, which is more properly known in legal terms as a prescriptive easement. I explained in the simple, clear language I used to use for freshman law students that for a prescriptive easement to be established in this state, the use must be adverse, open, notorious, and continuous for a period of no less than 20 years. I pointed out that Dilea's neighborly permission nullified the adverse requirement. His use was permissive, not hostile. Furthermore, the development itself was only 15 years old, making the 20-year requirement a mathematical impossibility. I attached a copy of my property deed, a certified survey plat map from when I purchased the ranch, and a copy of my title insurance policy, which explicitly stated there were no unrecorded easements on the property. I concluded the letter with a simple demand: "You have 72 hours to remove the sign, repair the damage to my land, and provide written assurance that no further trespass will occur. Failure to comply will compel me to pursue all available legal remedies, including, but not limited to, actions for trespass, property damage, and slander of title." I sent the letter via email with read receipts requested for all board members, and I sent a physical copy via certified mail, return receipt requested, to the HOA's official address. On paper, my position was now unassailable. Carol's response came less than 24 hours later. It was not the written assurance I had requested. Instead, she forwarded my email to the entire community mailing list of over 300 homeowners. Above my carefully crafted letter, she wrote a screed of her own. "Dear neighbors," it began. "I'm sorry to report that our new neighbor Arthur Pendleton is attempting to use legal threats and intimidation to block access to our beloved community trail. He is trying to hoard a piece of our mountain that everyone has enjoyed for years. Please see his hostile letter below. This is a classic example of a wealthy outsider trying to change our way of life. But rest assured your board will not be bullied. We will fight for your right to access the forest. We will not let one selfish man ruin it for everyone." She had taken my precise, fact-based letter and reframed it as an attack on the community itself. She had turned me into the villain. The replies started trickling in, all addressed to the entire community. "Sue. Thank you for standing up for us, Carol. Don't let him bully you. My kids love that trail." She was a master of public performance, of crafting a narrative where she was the hero, and facts were merely inconvenient obstacles. My certified letter, when it was eventually delivered, was refused. The post office sent it back to me, unopened. I took the entire returned envelope and placed it carefully in my file. Her refusal to accept service was just one more piece of evidence. This was the escalation I had anticipated. She had rejected the path of reason. Now, I had to move on to the next phase. I had to treat the HOA not as a neighborhood association, but as a hostile corporate entity. I retreated to my study. The large window looked out over the meadow, toward the distant peaks. Eleanor had loved this view. She would sit in the armchair by the window and sketch for hours. That room was my sanctuary, my command center. I spent the next 2 days in there. I didn't just review my own documents. I began a deep systematic investigation into the Mountain View estates. HOA itself, I called Maria, my old paralegal. She had retired a few years before I did, but her mind was as sharp as a tack, and she loved a good paper chase more than anyone I knew. "Arthur," she said, her voice warm over the phone, "I thought you were done with this nonsense. Don't tell me some developer is trying to build a strip mall on your hawk sanctuary." "Worse, Marai," I said. "An HOA," she groaned. "The petty tyrants. What do you need?" "Everything," I said. "I want you to pull the articles of incorporation for the Mountain View estates. HOA, I want the original subdivision plat map filed with the county in the late 70s. I want a full chain of title for their designated common areas. I want every permit, every variance, every document ever filed with the county that has their name on it. I have a feeling our Madam President hasn't done her own homework." "On it," Maria said. "It'll be like old times." While Maria dove into the county's digital archives, I started on the HOA's own governing documents. As a homeowner, I was entitled to copies of all meeting minutes, financial statements, and board resolutions. I submitted a formal, written request citing the relevant section of the bylaws. I knew they would drag their feet, so I gave them the legally required 10-day window to comply. In the meantime, I started reading the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC&Rs that govern the community. I read all 120 pages. Twice. I was looking for the source of Carol's power, the specific clauses she was twisting to her own ends. And I found them. The language was broad, giving the board authority to protect and enhance community assets. It was a classic, poorly written clause, designed to sound good but legally vague. It was the kind of ambiguity a bully like Carol could drive a truck through. But the document also contained something else, a detail I was sure she had overlooked. It stipulated that any capital improvement over $10,000, or any project that materially altered a common area, required a vote of a 2/3 majority of all homeowners, not just a simple board vote. That sign and the trail improvements she had planned would easily exceed that limit. She hadn't just trespassed on my land, she was likely violating her own association's bylaws in the process. 3 days later, Maria called me back. Her voice was electric. "Arthur, you are not going to believe this. You were right. She never did her homework." "Tell me," I said, leaning forward in my chair. "Okay, so I started with the common areas," Maria began. "There are 3 of them. Parcel A is the little park with the playground. Parcel C is the green belt along the main road. The titles on those are clean, transferred from the original developer to the HOA in 1987. But Parcel B, Parcel B is a masterpiece of incompetence." "Parcel B," I prompted. "That's the 10-acre plot at the top of the development. The one that borders my property and the national forest, the very same," she said. "The land that her precious Sunrise Trail is supposed to lead to. Arthur, the HOA doesn't own it." I was silent for a moment, letting the implications sink in. "What do you mean?" "They don't own it. I mean, the title was never transferred. The original developer, a company called Ponderosa Pines Development, LLC, went bankrupt in 1988, right in the middle of Phase 2 of the project. They deeded over Parcels A and C, but the transfer for Parcel B was never finalized. The LLC was dissolved. The property became what's called orphan land. It sat in limbo for years, until the county took possession of it for unpaid property taxes in 1995. I felt a slow smile spread across my face. So you're telling me that the land Carol Jenkins is claiming as a vital community asset, the destination of her grand trail, is actually owned by the county? Owned and zoned, Maria said, her voice filled with glee. As a natural resource conservation area. I pulled the zoning file, and you are going to love this part. The zoning designation was applied in 1999 as part of the county-wide comprehensive plan update. I started to laugh. A deep, genuine laugh that seemed to come from my shoes. Let me guess, I said. The zoning expressly forbids the development of recreational trails, picnic areas, or any other high-impact public use, in order to protect a sensitive watershed. It's like you wrote it yourself, Maria said. I did, I replied. I literally did. This was the bombshell. This was the key that unlocked the entire puzzle. Carol's entire project was a fraud from the ground up. She wasn't just trespassing on my property to build a trail. She was trespassing on my property to build a trail that led to a destination she had no legal right to use, in a manner that was a direct violation of county law. A law that I had personally written. The irony was so rich, so profound it was almost poetic. She had no idea. She was a general marching her army off a cliff. She couldn't even see. I kept the receipts. I kept all of them. And I had just found the one that would bankrupt her kingdom. The next move was hers, and it came, as expected, with a lack of subtlety. A few days after my discovery, I was in my workshop, restoring an old rocking chair Eleanor had bought at a flea market, when I saw the flashing lights through the window. A sheriff's department vehicle was pulling up my driveway. I put down my sandpaper, wiped the sawdust from my hands, and walked out to meet it. Carol was right behind the car in her pristine SUV, arriving like a conquering hero. A young deputy stepped out of the patrol car. But he looked barely old enough to shave, and he had the cautious, world-weary expression of someone who spends their days refereeing neighborhood disputes. Carol was out of her car before he could even close his door, pointing a trembling finger at me. "That's him, officer," she exclaimed, her voice pitched for maximum drama. "That's the man. He's been harassing me, sending threatening letters, and now he's put up these horrible signs to block public access to the trail." She gestured wildly at the simple, legally compliant no trespassing signs I had posted along my surveyed property line the day before. They were small, professional, and spaced exactly as prescribed by state law. The deputy looked at me, then at the signs, then back at Carol. "Ma'am, what exactly is the issue here?" "The issue," Carol said, stepping forward, "is that this man is illegally blocking a community right-of-way. He's denying access to a trail that has been used for decades. We need you to make him take down those signs and stop intimidating residents." She was performing again, playing the role of the besieged community leader, the protector of the common good. She was confident, assured, and completely wrong. The deputy turned to me. "Sir, what's your side of this?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't engage with her accusations. I simply said, "Good afternoon, deputy. My name is Arthur Pendleton. This is my private property." I walked back into my house for a moment and returned with a single, clear, plastic folder. From it, I produced 3 documents. "This is my driver's license," I said, handing it to him. "This is a certified copy of the deed to my property. And this," I said, unfolding it, "is a copy of the official survey plat map, recorded with the county, showing my property lines. The signs are posted 10 inches inside the line. On my land." The deputy took the documents. He was professional. He looked at the deed with its official county seal. He looked at the plat map, his eyes tracing the boundary lines drawn by a licensed surveyor. He then walked over to one of the survey stakes, a small iron pin nearly hidden in the grass, and then looked at the no trespassing sign a few inches away. He looked back at Carol, who was standing with her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She was holding a thick binder with the HOA logo on it, which she thrust forward. "I have our bylaws right here." The deputy held up a hand. "Ma'am, with all due respect, your HOA bylaws do not supersede a recorded county deed." He handed my documents back to me. "Sir, based on what you've shown me, you are well within your rights to post these signs on your own property." Carol was sputtering. But the historic use, the community." "This is a civil matter, ma'am," the deputy said, his tone final. "If you believe you have a legal claim to an easement, you'll have to take it to court. You can't compel him to grant you access. For now, this is his property." He turned to me. "Is there anything else I can help you with, Mr. Pendleton?" This was a critical moment. I could have demanded he trespass her from my property right then and there, but that would have been a small victory. I was playing a much longer game. "Yes, deputy, there is," I said calmly. "I would like to make a formal statement for your report. I would like it noted that I have informed Miss Jenkins both verbally and in writing that she and her agents are not permitted on my property. I would like it noted that she is here today, on my land, against my express wishes. And I would like it noted that I feel harassed and intimidated by her continued presence and baseless accusations." I made sure to use the specific legal terms. I was creating another piece of the paper trail. His report and the body camera footage he was recording would now become evidence. The deputy's expression didn't change, but I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He recognized the language. He knew I wasn't just an angry old man. He pulled out his notepad. "Go ahead, sir," he said. He took down my statement, word for word. Carol stood there, fuming, her binder of useless bylaws hanging limply at her side. She had called the authorities to be her cavalry, and instead, they had just taken a sworn statement against her. The law, the real law, had shown up, and it wasn't on her side. She had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The deputy's visit seemed to light a fire under Carol, but it was a fire of desperation, not reason. The community, however, was starting to stir. My quiet, documented resistance had not gone unnoticed. A few days after the incident with the sheriff, I was out checking my fence line when a small, older sedan pulled up my drive. An elderly man got out. It was Mr. Henderson, the man I knew Carol had been tormenting over his dandelions. He was holding a worn baseball cap in his hands, twisting it nervously. "Mr. Pendleton?" he asked, his voice soft. "I hope I'm not bothering you." "Not at all, Mr. Henderson. Please, call me Arthur." He looked around, as if worried Carol might pop out from behind a tree. "I saw what happened with the sheriff the other day. I saw you stand up to her. Most of us, we're too scared. She finds you, she puts a lien on your house. It's easier to just pay and keep your head down." He looked down at his hat. "But it ain't right. What she's doing to you, what she's done to a lot of us, it just ain't right." I nodded, waiting. I sensed he had more to say. "I go to all the board meetings," he continued, his voice barely a whisper, "to try and speak up, but she just shouts everyone down. Anyway, at the last meeting, after you sent that first letter, she talked about you. I get nervous, so I record the meetings on my phone, just so I can remember what was said." He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out an old smartphone. "I think you should hear this." He pressed a button, and Carol's voice filled the quiet afternoon. It was tinny and distorted, but her words were crystal clear. "Don't worry about Pendleton's letter," her recorded voice said, full of contempt. "It's just bluster. We'll just take the path. What's he going to do? Sue us? He's some old man living alone. He's too old and tired to fight. We'll bog him down in paperwork. By the time he figures out what to do, the trail will be established, and no judge will order us to tear it out. We just have to be aggressive and act fast. Mr. Henderson looked up at me, his eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and defiance. She's not just mistaken, he said. She's doing it on purpose. She knows she doesn't have the right. I looked at the phone in his hand. It was the smoking gun. It was direct evidence of her bad faith, of her willful intent to deprive me of my property rights. Mr. Henderson, I said slowly, you have no idea how important this is. Would you be willing to sign an affidavit testifying that this recording is authentic? He swallowed hard, but then his jaw set. Yes, he said, his voice firm. It's time someone stopped her. He was the fearful ally, the first crack in the wall of silence she had built around the community. The cracks began to spread. 2 days later, I received an anonymous email. It was short and to the point. I'm a member of the HOA board. I'm horrified by what Carol is doing. She's going to bankrupt the association. She hired a law firm without a full board vote and is planning to file an injunction against you. Attached are the internal emails where she ignored our concerns about the legality of this trail. Please use them. I can't give you my name, but I can't let her do this. The attached emails were a gold mine. They showed 2 of the 5 board members, including a woman named Susan Miller, who was an accountant, repeatedly questioning the legal basis for the trail and the potential costs. Carol's replies were dismissive and arrogant. In one, she wrote, "My brother-in-law is a top real estate lawyer in California, and he said our case is a slam dunk. We need to stop being cowards and show this community we're leaders." The disillusioned insider had just handed me proof of the board's internal conflict and Carola's reckless disregard for her fiduciary duty. My coalition was forming, even if its members were still in the shadows. Just as the anonymous email had warned, the final escalation arrived. Via a process server, a young man in a cheap suit handed me a thick envelope. Inside was a summons. The Mountain View Estates HOA had filed for a temporary injunction in county court, demanding I be ordered to remove my signs and grant them immediate access to my property. They had also issued a special assessment for legal defense of $500 to every single homeowner. The hearing was set for the following week. This was her last, most desperate move. She was using the community's own money to sue me into submission. It was a classic bully tactic, designed to crush an individual under the weight of legal fees and public pressure. She was trying to make an example of me. But in doing so, she had moved the battle from the community bulletin board to a place where her charm and rhetoric meant nothing. She had moved it into my world. A courtroom. A place where the only thing that mattered was the evidence. The only thing that mattered was what was on paper. I took the summons and placed it on top of the Carol file. I then picked up the phone and called a man named David Chen. David had been my sharpest student at the local law school, where I occasionally taught a seminar on property law. He was now a partner at the best litigation firm in the county. "David," I said, "it's Arthur Pendleton. I have a case for you. And I've already done all the discovery." The day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. It was a small, wood-paneled room in the old county courthouse, a room I knew well. On one side sat Carol and 2 loyal board members, flanked by a slick-looking lawyer in an expensive suit. Behind them, a crowd of her supporters, murmuring and casting hostile glances my way. On my side there was just me, David Chen, and in the back row, sitting by himself, Mr. Henderson, clutching his old baseball cap. Susan, the accountant from the board, was there too, sitting on the aisle, looking nervous but determined. The atmosphere was thick with tension. Carol was in her element, playing the part of the noble, wronged leader. She whispered dramatically to her lawyer, shook her head in sorrowful disbelief, and offered brave little smiles to her supporters. It was a masterful performance. Her lawyer, a man named Bartlett, began. He was smooth, confident. He spoke of community, of shared values, of the simple joy of a walk in the woods. He painted a picture of a trail used for generations, a cherished local tradition now being threatened by a wealthy, reclusive newcomer. He presented affidavits from a few long-time residents who recalled walking the path over the years. He presented the HOA's bylaws, highlighting the board's duty to maintain community assets. It was a compelling narrative built on emotion and nostalgia. It was also a house of cards. When it was David's turn, he stood and walked to the lectern. He was the opposite of Bartlett. He was quiet, methodical. "Your Honor," he began, "we are not here to discuss feelings or nostalgia. We are here to discuss property law. The plaintiff's entire case rests on a claim of a prescriptive easement, a claim that is factually and legally baseless." David began to present our evidence. He moved with a calm, deliberate pace, dismantling their case piece by piece. Exhibit A, Your Honor, a certified copy of the deed for Mr. Pendleton's property. Exhibit B, a certified survey plat. As you can see, there are no recorded easements of any kind. He continued. The plaintiff claims historic use, but for a prescriptive easement, that use must be adverse. Exhibit C, an affidavit from the previous property owner, Dale Hauser, stating that all prior use of the path was with his explicit neighborly permission, thereby nullifying the adverse requirement. I had tracked Dale down to a retirement community in Arizona, and he had been more than happy to set the record straight. Bartlett, the HOA lawyer, was starting to look uncomfortable. He had clearly expected a simple argument over neighborhood customs, not a detailed legal assault. Furthermore, David said, his voice gaining strength, the plaintiff's actions were not taken in good faith. Exhibit D, Your Honor. He placed a small audio player on the corner of the judge's bench. This is a recording of the defendant, Miss Jenkins, at an official HOA board meeting. He pressed play. Carol's voice, tinny but clear, filled the silent courtroom. "Don't worry about Pendleton's letter. We'll just take the path. What's he going to do, sue us? He's too old and tired to fight." A gasp went through the room. Carol's face went white. Her supporters shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Judge Miller, stared at Carol over the top of her reading glasses. David wasn't finished. Exhibit E. Internal emails from the HOA board provided by a concerned board member, showing that Miss Jenkins was warned about the legal and financial risks but proceeded anyway in direct violation of her fiduciary duty. He placed the stack of printed emails on the clerk's desk. Exhibit F. A copy of the official report from the county sheriff's department detailing the defendant's trespass and harassment of my client. By now, Bartlett was frantically whispering to Carol, who was staring blankly ahead, her mask of confident indignation completely gone. He looked like a man who had been sent into a gunfight armed with a strongly worded letter. "And finally, Your Honor," David said, his voice dropping slightly, "the issue that makes this entire affair not just frivolous but reckless." He walked back to our table and picked up a large, bound document. The plaintiff's proposed trail is intended to connect to a 10-acre parcel of land they refer to as HOA Common Area, specifically Parcel B on the original subdivision map. But the HOA does not, and has never, owned this land. Exhibit G, a certified chain of title showing that Parcel B is in fact owned by this very county. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Judge Miller leaned forward, her expression now one of intense interest. "But it gets worse, Your Honor," David said, letting the moment hang. He opened the large document. "This is a certified copy of County Ordinance 99-14, which zoned that parcel as a natural resource conservation area. And attached to that ordinance is this." He pulled out a single folded map. "A primary drainage easement, document number 34B, filed with the county recorder in 1988. He unfolded the map and placed it on an easel facing the judge. A thick blue line ran directly through the area of the proposed trail. "This easement," David said, his voice resonating with quiet authority, "expressly forbids any surface improvements, construction, or concentration of foot traffic, due to the severe risk of erosion and downstream flooding, a risk that would create massive liability, not just for the HOA, but for the county itself. The plaintiff is not just asking this court to sanction trespassing. She is asking this court to sanction a direct and dangerous violation of county law." He paused and looked directly at Carol. "A law, I might add, that was drafted and implemented by my client, Mr. Pendleton, during his tenure as the county's chief planning consultant. That was it. The final, fatal blow. The collapse. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a profound and sudden stillness." Carol's lawyer, Bartlett, just stared at the map on the easel. His mouth was slightly open. All the color had drained from his face. He had been completely and utterly blindsided. He had filed a lawsuit without ever bothering to check the county's own records. He had walked his client into a perfectly laid trap. But the true collapse was Carol. The righteous anger, the performative victimhood, the unshakable confidence. It all evaporated in an instant. Her face went slack, her eyes blank. The mask didn't just drop, it shattered. In that moment, she wasn't a powerful HOA president or a community leader. She was just a woman in a courtroom who had been publicly and comprehensively proven to be not only wrong, but a fool. She finally understood. She finally realized she hadn't been fighting an old man. She had been fighting the system itself and the man who had built it. She had no idea. And now, she did. Judge Miller took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. She looked at the map, then at the pile of exhibits, and then she fixed her gaze on Carol's lawyer. "Mr. Bartlett," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "is this true? Did you file for this injunction without performing a basic title search or reviewing the county's own zoning maps for the property in question?" Bartlett stammered. "Your Honor, we were operating on the information provided by my client." "That is not an answer," the judge cut him off. "You have brought a frivolous, vexatious, and frankly embarrassing action into my courtroom. You have wasted the court's time. You have wasted the defendant's time and money, and you have exposed your own client to significant legal jeopardy." She turned her attention to Carol. "Miss Jenkins, your behavior has been appalling. You have abused your position of authority. You have misrepresented facts to your community, and you have shown a shocking disregard for the law and the property rights of your neighbors." The verdict was swift and brutal. "The request for a temporary injunction is denied with prejudice," Judge Miller declared. "The Mountain View Estates HOA is ordered to pay all of Mr. Pendleton's legal fees and court costs. The sign and any other materials installed on the defendant's property are to be removed within 24 hours, and the land restored to its original condition at the HOA's expense." She wasn't done. "Furthermore, I am directing the clerk of this court to forward a copy of these proceedings, specifically Exhibits G and H regarding the violation of the county-owned conservation area, to the County Council and the Office of Code Enforcement for immediate investigation. This hearing is adjourned." She banged the gavel and it echoed in the stunned silence of the room. The aftermath was a slow-motion cascade of consequences. The first to fall was Carol. A special meeting of the HOA was called the following week. It was held in the community clubhouse, and it was standing room only. Susan Miller, the accountant from the board, who had given me the emails, stood up and made a motion for a recall vote. She laid out the facts: the disastrous lawsuit, the wasted community funds, the lies about the ownership of Parcel B, and the new investigation by the county. When the vote was called, it was nearly unanimous, and Carol was removed as president, and she and her 2 loyal board members resigned on the spot. I heard later that she and her husband put their house up for sale less than a month after the hearing. They left as they had arrived in a whirlwind of their own making. The community began to heal. Susan was elected the new HOA president. Her first act was to rescind the $500 special assessment and refund the money to every homeowner. Her second was to form a committee to review every fine and violation Carol had issued over the past 2 years. Mr. Henderson's dandelion fines were canceled, and the money he had paid was returned to him with a formal, written apology from the new board. The era of petty tyranny was over. The rules were still there, but they were now enforced with reason and common sense, not as instruments of personal power. Neighbors started treating me differently. The hostile stares were replaced with nods, then waves, then quiet conversations at the local grocery store. People I'd never spoken to would stop me to say thank you. Mr. Henderson started dropping off a basket of vegetables from his garden, my porch, every Friday morning. Susan would call every now and then, just to ask my opinion on some zoning question, always respectfully, always grateful for the advice. I wasn't the reclusive villain anymore. I was just Arthur, their neighbor. The invisible lines of community, which Carol had tried to redraw with aggression, were slowly, organically, reforming around principles of mutual respect. Months passed. The autumn leaves turned and fell, and the first snow dusted the high peaks. I was sitting on my porch one morning, in the old rocking chair I had finally finished restoring. The sun was warm on my face, and a hawk was circling the meadow. My mug of coffee, the one Eleanor had made, was warm in my hands. The gaudy sign was long gone, the holes filled in so perfectly you couldn't tell they had ever been there. My no trespassing signs were still up, but they seemed different. Now they weren't a declaration of war anymore. They were just a quiet statement of fact, a simple affirmation of order that everyone now understood and respected. On the small table beside me was the Carol file. I had kept it all. The notices, the canceled checks, the court documents, the return certified letter. It was a complete history of the conflict, a testament to the power of a well-documented truth. I picked it up, walked into my study, and placed it in the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet. I didn't need it anymore. It had served its purpose. I closed the drawer, a quiet final click. I went back out to the porch and looked out at my land. I thought about the nature of rules. People like Carol see them as weapons, as tools to impose their will on others. But that was never their purpose. I spent my life writing them, and I knew the truth. Rules, laws, property lines, they are not meant to be cages. They are meant to be the invisible architecture of a civil society. They provide clarity. They manage expectations. They are the silent, agreed-upon boundaries that allow us to live side by side in peace, giving us the freedom to be good neighbors. Eleanor had filled our life with beauty. My job had been to build the quiet, sturdy framework where that beauty could thrive. In a small, unexpected way, I had done it again. I had restored order. Not with anger, not with threats, but with patience, with process, and with paper. The quiet was back. and it was exactly as I remembered it. I took a sip of my coffee. It was the perfect temperature,